and then posting the links to these.
Yeah. Yeah. If, again, it's not going to be polished or anything, but,
Yeah.
if it helps people get an insight on the project, then that'll be cool. Cool. So I'm going to work on this, see how far we get, but work on adding this bulk endpoint for the data API. The main reason is because it will, kind of propagate through the whole core of the platform or the system. So just to give a high level on how things are kind of set up, hyper63 is kind of built based on the hex architecture. I call it ports and adapters architecture. But basically you have, some sort of interface in hyper63's internals. That's kind of the app or the API. And then you have a core, and then you have ports, and those ports can have different adapters. So that's kind of this architecture that Hyper is really kind of, make more mainstream, but because there's a lot of benefits of having these ports and adapters and being able to swap them out. But it's hard to do when you're building everything else. So having something that kind of builds that for you, I think can have a lot of advantages. Here's kind of a view of that in kind of Hyperland. So here is the app express package, and we have an app GraphQL, but you could have an app gRPC or protobuffers or whatever, but that's kind of your entry point to hyper63. And then down here, you have some middleware and hooks. So with middleware, you can add security or other kind of features, and hooks, you can get observability out of hyper63. So you can add a hook to say, send all these events to this endpoint, or send all these events to console, those types of things. And then you have your core, and your core is just really kind of the keeper of the business rules, right? So basically in MVC days, you could think of this as more as kind of the controller and the model kind of combined. And then you have these ports, and a port, basically all it's responsible to do is make sure that an adapter implements a specific specification. So if the data features is the ability to create, read, update, and delete, right? Then the adapter, regardless of what the adapter driver is, needs to implement those with specific function patterns. And, if I throw an adapter on here, MongoDB, and it doesn't implement those things, then I need, when Hyper fires up, I need Hyper to yell at me and say, you're trying to use MongoDB, and that adapter is not compatible with the data port. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. So with this issue, we're going to add a new endpoint called bulk, and this bulk endpoint will allow us to send multiple JSON documents through the Express app, through core, and then into an adapter. So we got to kind of touch the app, core, the data port, because it's a new specification, and then each adapter that's defined. And, again, from my standpoint, you can tackle this any kind of way, but I'm gonna kind of write the documentation first, at least enough to suss out any kind of issues, right? So I'm going to write an endpoint documentation, and then I'm going to go into App Express and build out the input endpoint, and then test that in kind of a unit test, and then go to the data port and build out the spec, and then create some tests around that, and then publish the data port, update the core, and then go and implement the pouch DB adapter and the couch DB adapter. Don't know if I'll get all of that in an hour, but we'll see how far we get. That's why I kind of create these check boxes, so then we can tomorrow kind of continue on until we knock this issue out. So far, so good?
Yeah, definitely. So what's the use case? So it's kind of like bulk loading, either like seeding or just getting the data storage up to date with that.
Yeah. So let's say you wanted to migrate from one implementation data store to another implementation data store. You could use this bulk feature, but basically, just to give you an idea, how it would look is like post data name, and then bulk, and then you would just send an array of JSON documents. And again, if I were building a migration, I would probably like create like a pagination stream, right? So I'd grab like a chunk of 1,000 documents and then bulk upload those 1,000, and then grab the next chunk of 1,000 and then bulk, and just create a stream between the processes, right? And basically the bulk API, if the data doesn't exist, then it's going to create a new one. If it does exist and has a valid ID, then it will merge what's in there with what you send. And then the other option that I kind of put in here is maybe if you send underscore delete true as part of your document, it could actually remove it. So that kind of gives you this full kind of bulk read, update, and remove kind of flow. So then you could literally send a bunch of documents with just their ID and underscore delete equals true. And that would be like a batch delete, right? Cool. So I'm going to go into the documentation and add a command. Just follow my pattern post / data / name bulk. JSON. And I've got parameters, example, and responses. And I'm just going to cheat a little bit. So all path parameters kind of follow the same semantics and same rules. Basically, you can't enter anything with an uppercase. Someone trying to get in. Yeah. Sorry. Okay. So you can't enter anything with an uppercase, and you can use digits and then any of these special characters for the name thing. So, and then there's the request body. And basically, see what I did here. Yeah, I just used a code block. So documentation is never the funnest part. That's why I try to do it first. Because if I get compressed with time, I tend to procrastinate it off, and I know it's not the most fun part to watch, but if I don't do it, I need someone to code review me.
It's a good reminder. I skip
Yeah,
it too much.
yeah. So I'm just gonna do a couple. And I think I can copy the responses for the most part. Table. Oops, not there. Okay, 200 successful. And I kind of have results. And then that way, when it is an ad, if one of them fails for some reason, you would have, kind of each ID. And then like, okay, true, etc. An error occurred, access denied, maybe some other error codes we can add later. And then the last piece is the example. Look at my format. So I think I just do a curl command. Let's do that. Bulk, content type, token, and then data. Oh, that's not in JSON. Almost done. Or do this in JSON, or I will get yelled at. Thanks for joining, Ben. Can you see everything okay? Uh, Okay. So that's probably a good first stab at it. Um, I'm not trying to get it super polished, but just get enough down so that when I step away, I have something to reference. Um, and then hopefully, like by the time I finish this whole feature, I can come back here and, you know, really put some good context together. But does that look good to everybody? Cool,
Yeah, it makes sense.
cool. Okay. So that's done. So now implement the app express endpoint. So I've pulled down the project and I've got it here. I think I have to stop sharing and then share my other thing. Um, so I will share. Thanks, Ben. I saw your chat. Um, my console. Okay, cool. So it's laid out in a mono repo. So if I do a list, and there's gotta do some cleanup, but the most important one is this packages folder. That's where all the kind of the code lives. And then the other one is this images folder, and the images folder actually contains different builds of Hyper. So if I go into the images folder and see yeah, CouchDB, Dev, GraphQL, Nano. If I CD into Dev, that is a way to run Hyper in a development environment. And then anytime I make a change to any of the packages, it will automatically be reflected in this. So it's almost like just running a local host, and then it will pull all the Hyper modules, App Express, and these adapters when something changes, which is nice. And that's using Yarn workspaces. The other thing of note is the hyper63 config file. If we looked at that diagram again, this config file is like the code version of that diagram. So for this build, I'm using Express as my app, and I'm using, you know, memory as my adapter for the cache port. I'm using PouchDB as my adapter for the data port. I'm using mini search as the adapter for my search port. And then my middleware, I've got a JWT file for my middleware that just creates a shared secret token validator. So that's images, but we want to jump into packages. So we'll go into packages. And if we list our packages, we'll see App Express. That's the one we're going to work on first, and then core. And then we'll see the ports, and all of these are NPM packages. And then the adapter. So adapter dash, is an adapter, port dash is a port, app dash is an app, and then core is just core. And I've got a client that I'm working on. It probably should be client dash Node.js, client dash Dino, whatever. So I'm going to fix that. But we'll jump into App Express. And pull up the chat so I can see it. Okay. And then in App Express, it's just a simple Express app. If we look at package JSON, it's got cores, Express, helmet, mine, Multer in there as dependencies, and using tape as a test framework. So the first thing is let's see if all of our tests pass. That'll be a good check. And they do. And if we look at index.js, this has all of our kind of endpoints, but there's not a lot of code behind them. It's just kind of describing the endpoint. So in this case, we want to add bulk. So we'll just add it up here. It'll be a post and underscore bulk. And for hyper, the underscores represent an action, so they'll always be kind of a post for the most part, but it's an action. If that looks weird. So we're going to be receiving JSON body, and this bind core will actually bind our core to this endpoint so we can access stuff. And then finally, we want to call data dot bulk. I think that's pretty much it. Which doesn't exist yet. So this would be from our core, and let's go and look at that. So bind core is right here, and it's basically just a little middleware that's connecting our services to requests, so we have access to them. And then this data.bulk, I think, is coming from the APIs directory. So it's coming from this APIs directory, and that's the actual handler of the endpoint. So we'll need to create that in .api-data. So bind core takes the services, and the services are coming in. Let's see. Yeah. So the services are being injected in when this function gets executed. And then this bind core is a middleware that's just connecting the services to the request object. And then up here we have these APIs where we're actually storing the request handler for Express. So far, so good. So let's go into API data, index.js. And we'll add our post data db underscore bulk command. And we'll do exports dot bulk. And that's what we called it there, data.bulk. So exports.bulk. And what we're going to want to take in, and here what I'm doing is destructuring the request object. So we've put on the request object that data in that bind core. So I can destructure it by using the curly braces and just grab data. And I want to get params because that'll have the name of the DB. And then I want to get body, which will be the array of documents that I want to work on. And then I've got the response object. So basically, that's just a shortcut for doing request.data, request.params, request.body. And then I'm going to call this fork function, and we'll talk about that later. But basically, the fork function will run everything, and then either an error function will be called or a success function will be called. And fork just handles that so that all the side effects are pushed at the point of the endpoint, but basically the endpoint doesn't have to think about it. It's either going to get an error or a success. So we'll do the fork, and then we want to tell the fork what is a successful status code. And since we're actually modifying data, we'll use 201. And then we'll call data.bulk, and I'm going to pass in the params.db, which will be this parameter right here. And then we'll pass in the body. That. And when data.bulk is called, it's going to return an async data type. And that async data type is going to have a fork function on it. So we can go into utils. I'll just open that at the bottom here. Let's see. Utils. And this is the fork function. So the fork function takes a response, takes a status code, and a async data type, or a monad. Yeah, monad in this case. But it's just an async data type that has a fork function. And that fork function is going to take two arguments. The first argument will be the error function handler, and the second would be the success function handler. And then what it's going to do is just, if it's an error, it's going to see what the error status is, if it's specified, and then set that. So in case I want to say, this is a 401, you're not authorized, or a 404, what you're looking for is not found, I can specify that in my error object that I'll pass down the chain. If it doesn't have a status, then it's just going to say 500. Got an error, don't know what it is. And then the success is going to return the code that we specified, so 201, and then send the result. Does that make sense? Cool. So this just keeps things clean and just gives everything a consistent pattern, so that I can do really most of the heavy lifting in the core. So let's look at that, and let's write a test for that. So what we'll do right in our test is we'll just call it test bulk test. Let's do data bulk test, right? Data bulk test. And with test, use tape. It's super simple. And we'll pull in our app, and I think let me see something. So what we're going to do is we're going to run this through like a test server, and we'll actually do a post, and we'll actually mock out the services so that it returns a result, but then we should get a kind of just testing the code that we just added. We'll verify it that works. So let's create an app, and we require the index file, and then we're going to inject just middleware for right now. And here we'll also want to add our data commands from our core. But for now, we'll do middleware, and then we'll create a test server. And this just creates a, really a node server on a random port so that we could actually run these in parallel and they wouldn't break. We'll get our fetch. And then we'll do test and do post data, movies, bulk, and we'll do a sync. And I try not to make these tests too complicated. So I'm not really worried about the data at this point as much as I'm just trying to test the code that I just wrote, right? Just to make sure that the code I wrote works. And if it doesn't work, it yells at me. So we'll get a response. We'll do await, fetch, server.url. And then we'll want to do data, movies, bulk. So we want to call that. And we're going to want to add a method, post, headers, and we'll do content type, application JSON, body, JSON.stringify. We'll just add some dummy data. Okay. And then convert it to JSON. And I'm just going to log out the response and do T, okay, true for right now. Server.close. And I think that's it. Should get us started. Data.bulk.test. Okay, cool. So exports bulk. I think I've got a parentheses out of place, so that's good. That's a good start. Okay. Cool. Cool. So it ran, it made the post, generated an error, cannot read property bulk of undefined, because the service that we're giving it data doesn't exist. So we need to kind of create a little mock of that. So up here, we do data and we give it a method bulk, and let's just make it a no op for right now. Just return null. And let's see what we get. Okay, we get an error, cannot read property fork of null. Cool. So it got the bulk and it called it and returned null, and it's trying to return fork. So we could do a couple of things. One is we could return an object with a method fork on it and do it that way, or we could just use an async object. Either way, props. And then we could just do async dot resolve and just say, okay, true results, and just return an empty array and kind of simulate what would be going on. And we should run that. Okay, we got okay, true results, and everything is good. So down here, we just want to test this res okay. And we've got a passing test. Any questions about that? Cool. So we can do yarn test, and that's pretty cool. We can go, well, let me go ahead and do this. We can go ahead and do npm version patch, because that's pretty much that's pretty much all we want to do with this module. So we'll just do a version patch, and that'll up it to 10. And then make sure endpoint. Oh, ah, dang it, I didn't want to do it on main. Okay. So we'll push this up. Maybe. And we'll switch over to GitHub, I think. Okay. So we've got the endpoint implemented. We created kind of a happy test. And if we go to our actions, hopefully we see just the test app express GitHub action running. So it's running that test, and it's actually set up, which is pretty cool. You create a pull request, and when that pull request is approved, it will actually publish um, that to npm. So it'll publish the app express module to npm, which is really cool. So everything passed. Um, I'm going to switch back to the terminal because you guys probably use this all the time, but I started using this about, I don't know, 6 months ago, and I love it. Um, but you guys probably use it all the time. Check it out. So I've got a GH installed, and I can just do PR create and added bulk endpoint, submit, and there's my pull request. I love that. So we can go back to GitHub. you guys have probably been using that for years, but like in my previous world, I was with GitLab, and they just didn't really have tooling like that. They probably do now, but
The new version, I think, is actually pretty recent, like this past year.
cool.
That CLI.
Yeah, that's so nice, especially like creating a repo and doing merges. So we've got the uh, bulk endpoint added. Someone can review that, and then once it's approved, it will ship that. Of course, you know, we're not feature complete. We've got to go to the core, and I've got 13 minutes left, so I think I can do this. Go to the core, or actually what I'll do is go to the port, because I think this is really cool to implement the port. So if we go back to our diagram, we've got this data port. The data port is the cop, right? It's the one keeping the schema. So really a method can't exist in an adapter, and core can obviously call a method unless the port specifies it. So there's not a lot of code there, but it's very critical because it will allow for us to create all these adapters. Like you could build an adapter to IPFS, an adapter to whatever. As long as it implements this port, it will rock with hyper63, which is really cool. So let's do that. Okay, so we'll exit here. And what we'll do is get checkout main, and then get checkout -b, and bulk.
And Tom, correct me if I'm wrong, but those ports, they're also doing some sort of, they're also doing some validation on the inputs and outputs so that anyone that wants to implement an adapter, they don't have to do all that boilerplate sort of validation on inputs. They kind of get all of that out of the box with the core sort of validation.
Yeah, that's one of the coolest things about this. We're using a library called Zod, and it actually not only allows you to specify the object shape, but it'll actually validate the function call at runtime. And it's important for this to validate at runtime, because when you're putting an adapter, that adapter may be written by some third party, right? And when you run your instance of hyper63, you want those validations to fire at runtime, not necessarily at compile time, right? So that way, if your version is slightly different than what the adapter implemented, boom, you'll get notified immediately. So this is the schema definition. It's really simple. You have this Z object, and then it's got arguments on there to specify certain values, and they can chain together. So here we've got this create database as a function, and its arguments is a string, and it returns a promise that returns an object that looks like this Boolean, etc. Yeah, just a Boolean. So we want to create a bulk function here, right? So I'll just add it at the bottom. And use the plural probably. Bulk documents. and it's going to be a function. And that function is going to take some args. It's going to take an object. And that object will take a DB parameter property, name property. And one of the things I want to come back to it, if you remember in the documents where I said this has to be lowercase, this has to be uppercase. So with these, I can go in and say, you know, this DB, and I can add like additional qualifiers on it, like a regex, and then add a regex, and it has to match that regex, etc. Or I could say optional, and then it doesn't have to be on there. I think right now it's going to be DB and docs, right? Which will be an array. And inside that array will be an object, but we don't necessarily know the shape of those objects. So it has an any, just like TypeScript. And the nice thing about Zod is it kind of mimics the type system of TypeScript, and it can actually generate TypeScript types from it as well. So that's pretty cool. And then I think 1, 2 dot returns. So what we want to return is a promise. And then that promise is going to have an object. And the object will have an OK of type Boolean and results of an array of any, because we don't know the specific shape. Break this down a little bit.
I'm trying to remember in the when you're writing up the docs, but when you're writing up the docs, I think you were returning the just like an ID and like a status.
Yeah, let's go and look at that. Just one last thing before we do it is down here is where we kind of wrap real time, and basically we take the shape and grab that and we call validate, and the shape is the object inside this specification. So it's like bulk documents, and then there's a method called validate, and then we take the instance that's the adapter actually being passed in, and we just wrap that. And what that'll do is that'll validate all of the arguments and the returns as it's running. So it's acting like, you know, like in React when you use higher order functions to wrap stuff. That's what it's basically doing. Yeah, and let's go and check our documentation. And that's why we write the documentation, so we can go and check it. Sorry if this stop share and share stuff is painful. I don't know a better way to do it. And if I show my whole screen, you won't be able to see any kind of text or whatever. So, yeah. So we pass an array of objects. We don't necessarily know what's in here. And then when we return OK true and results, and we've got like an ID and an OK. So yeah, so we need to specify that in our return shape. Good call. Okay. Yeah, so we do know what this shape is, right? So we can say object, and then, okay. Boolean. And then ID string. Cool. Let's look at our index test. So let's go ahead and run that. Okay. So you can see right here, just by adding that our test failed, right? Because it's saying, you're passing in an adapter, and that adapter's not implementing this bulk documents. Now, I want to spend a whole day of like taking this and really cleaning up the message so that when it comes out on the API, it looks really clean. But it's got all the details in there. It's got, the code that the error fired, what's expected, what's received, and what's undefined. Hang on 1 second.
Travis, are you still using Emacs? Does it pain you to see him use Vim?
I actually switched. I switched sides. I'm actually using Vim. Actually, I switched when we were in that little code sharing or that shared space. It took me a little bit to get my fingers pre-trained.
Another one for Vim, Tom.
VS Code blew up on me. I was doing okay with the Vim stuff in VS Code, and now VS Code will not run on my system. So I'm back to Vim. I just can't take it anymore. Cool. So we've got this error, and that's how I want to get this library. Is like as we do things, we've got high signal when things are broken, and so here we've added the bulk documents and our test. It's not doing a whole lot, but it's telling us that we've created this fake adapter, and that fake adapter is not implementing the pattern. So documents. And we'll take DB and I think it was docs. Hope we'll find out. And then here we're just, doing a promise resolve. And it's got to be a object with an okay true and results. And now we have to specify those results. So we can just create one, okay, true, ID 1, something like that. Create more. We're running out of time. So I think I've got that. And then now in our block here, we'll call it to test it. So I think we just do adapter bulk documents, and we give it a DB foo and docs. We'll just add one type movie. Okay. And let's see how that works. Good. So we just implemented a endpoint on our port. And what's left is we got to go to each adapter and implement that, and then go to the core and mash everything together. Does that make sense? Yay.
Yeah.
So I'm going to just do npm version patch and status. Good. Commit. I didn't add any new files, I don't think. And then the last thing is to create a pull request. All right, well, 3 minutes over. Any questions? Was this informative?
Yeah, definitely. For me, seeing how the ports and adapters fit together so far. Yeah.
Yeah, so tomorrow we'll pick up at 4:30 and work on the adapters, which will be good, and then jump in the core. And I don't know how long it'll take for the adapter part, but then once we get that, core won't take but a few minutes. So I think we should be able to wrap it up tomorrow or Wednesday, and then jump on security or something fun like that. I don't know.
Security or something fun like that. Famous last words.
That's right. Cool. Well, thanks for joining. Hope you guys have a good afternoon, evening, and stay dry, stay warm.
All right.
Thanks, Tom.
See ya.